Hello, everybody. This is Tyler Preston 20. I'm here with Faye again. We're not going to talk about movies this time. We're going to talk about Black Lives
Mhm.
Matter. Okay, so how are you doing, Faye?
Mhm. I'm doing good. It's good that you told me, like, can I set up a stream right now? Would you be available? I had to like rush and put all my makeup on and stuff. But I was in bed. I didn't sleep last night until about 5 a.m. Because I just couldn't sleep. So I woke up at around 12
I'm so sorry that I had to rush you with your
midday.
makeup and stuff. But, like, how come you were, like, staying up that
Oh
late?
no, it's fine.
But how come you were, like, staying up that late? Like, was it because you
I've been
couldn't.
sleeping well. For the last few days, it's just been me unable to sleep because I was just sort of processing and digesting all the news. And that's kind of like how I get when something serious happens. At first, like I don't know how to react to it. I don't know how to process it because it takes me time to fully understand it. And then as soon as it kind of hits me and it's sunk in, I just can't do anything until I've talked about it and gotten it out. So I couldn't sleep for the last couple of days. And once I got my video out that I posted last night, I finally felt like I could sleep. So I slept.
Okay, kind of sounds bad because like whenever I have like sleeping problems, what I do, I would just drink like sleepy time tea and it make me go to sleep. So you might want to try
Sleepy
sleepy
time tea.
time tea.
Sleepy time tea.
Yeah, yeah, it's actually the name of the tea. Actually, I'm not joking either. It's like sleepy time tea.
Okay.
I'm not sure
Um,
if it's like in United Kingdom or not, but like it's in here.
I mean, I have my own process for sleeping, but I guess like it's not entirely a bad thing because I usually follow my gut and I listen to um, what's going on in my brain, and I just need to. If I need to talk about something, I need to talk about it. So I don't
Okay.
necessarily see it as a bad thing.
Right, but getting back to Black Lives Matter, like I don't think I ever asked you this both on camera or off camera, but like, what kind of political like leanings do you have?
So I'm mostly apolitical because I don't understand politics very well. A lot of people have told me that it's really important that I do, and it's really really important for me to get involved because I'm in the activism sphere. But honestly, it really goes over my head. It goes over my head. A lot of political language, a lot of political sort of events and things. It goes over my head, and I don't fully understand it. But if you put a gun to my head and you were like, make a choice, like where are you? It would be center left. I'm not completely left, and I'm not completely right. I'm center, but leaning to more left policies.
Okay, and you made a video yesterday. I saw it on your page, and then you also made
Mhm.
like a lot of retweets about different companies supporting Black Lives
Yeah.
Matter. How come you support Black Lives Matter for those who don't know?
Um, so for me, I think the Black Lives Matter movement has been brewing for a really, really long time. Initially, when it started, and even now, and I told you, I don't know all of the issues and I don't know all of the things that have gone into it, all of the cases. Like I've seen the list of names, I've seen videos, and the last couple of days, it's just been me madly researching all of the videos, all of the takes, all of the articles, all of the stories. And I think it's finally gotten to a boiling point in the States where people killed by police officers, especially it should not be racially motivated, and that's what it looks like. And I, a lot of people are kind of screaming about peaceful protest and how this is leading to riots and looting and stuff like that. But every civil rights movement has a attached to it. Like when you look at Stonewall, when you look like at the suffragette movement, when you look at the early civil rights movement with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, there's always been rights attached to it. And in my opinion, once peaceful protests are no longer working, there's only very, very few options you have left for what you can do following that. Um, and that's not me saying that I condone violence or I'm inciting violence, but you need to understand the riot in terms of what has been going on for years and years and years, and that is why I support the Black Lives Movement.
Okay. As far as the whole entire issue about police brutality, like I'm not really familiar about what's happening in your country, but would you say that police brutality is as common in United Kingdom compared to my country?
I don't think that it is as common, but there is systematic forms of racism here in the UK as well. Again, I'm not as informed as people who've been involved in this movement probably have been from the beginning. But we have heard certain cases of people of color being abused, killed. There's the story of a girl who was drowned, and the people who drowned her were just let off. There are stories of women who worked in government roles, like in for the TfL or the transport system here in London, who have been killed. Never really addressed. Those cases are closed, and they the it doesn't seem to be taken as seriously. And I think it does, because when we talk about civil rights and we talk about equality between races on a systematic level, it doesn't seem to have reached that, especially when it comes to justice and these law enforcers. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. I
Yeah.
understand what you're talking about. But as far as like the issue of police brutality, it seems as though that a lot of police here they try to just reach for the gun, pull it
Mhm.
out, and then questions later. Would you say it's the same sort of issue with United Kingdom that they use the gun to actually go first and ask questions later?
Um, so I think one of the benefits we enjoy here in the UK is that a lot of people don't open carry. Like guns are kind of reserved for like farm owners, and police do carry guns, but they're not really used in like that. Um, Actually, I'm not even sure that police carry guns. They might carry them in London, like in big cities, but not across the country. And we don't have gun laws here in the UK, which is something that I appreciate. And I'm not pro guns. I don't understand the purpose of having them. A lot of people have a lot of different arguments, like self defense and all of that stuff. But there are other ways of self defense that doesn't include firearms. Um, so I think that that makes it a little bit more difficult for police to be brutal in this country. Does that make sense? Whereas
Yeah,
in
I think it's like a difference of like mentality because
yeah,
I guess for a long time, of course, my country has like a history of being rebellious against like whatever. And so I think that's probably the reason why we continue to have it because of our rebellious attitude because we constantly always fight, always fighting. But
mm.
as far as, of course, like you mentioned about the lack of guns, would you say that they tend to rely more on like, stun guns or like tasers or different types of things when it comes down to like the criminal activities?
So in terms of police activity here in the UK, I wouldn't say necessarily that there are, and again, I'm not informed, but
Okay.
I wouldn't say necessarily that there are a lot of cases of police brutality here. The instances for the Black Lives Matter movement here is more so the miscarriage of justice following someone's death, if that makes more sense. So it's more to do with the guilty parties associated with deaths or abuse or assault not being carried to full justice as they would be if they were from the majority race, which is the white population.
Hmm. Right, because according to I think statistics, like 60% of Americans are white, while
Mhm,
12% of people here are African American. And I
mhm.
think for your country, would you say like it's like 70, 80%?
I haven't checked the recent statistics, but it is majority white.
Yeah.
It's majority white. The minorities sort of populate the major cities, so London, Manchester, Liverpool, and others. Like as soon as you move out of London, it's very much when I've traveled, I'm very much like an exotic creature. People don't see brown skinned people. Um, I once went to a wedding in Essex because one of my friends lives there, and her entire family is white. So when they saw me, they were like, "Oh, who are you? Where did you come from?" So people who are white are definitely a minority across the country. Um, People who don't live in the major cities are definitely a minority. Brown people, black people are definitely a minority across the country. But in London, we are much more populous, and um, I don't know. This is why I kind of said that I'm not the best person to bring along because I myself have not faced a lot of racism in my time, and to be fair, that's probably because I hung around with the same kind of people. You know, I stayed in an isolated kind of community, so that kind of prevents a lot of racism. But what I do want to say is that I was raised with a lot of racism because the kind of communities that I hung around with would often, and it's not just towards black people, it's towards all kinds of communities. So
Wait, so you're talking about like when you used to be like a Muslim?
yeah, so
Okay.
the South Asian community, so people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, we have this culture of racism. So my mother, even though I believe that she was a good person and she had friends of all colors, she would say racist things. She would say, and we're talking like really, really racist things, like to discipline my siblings. She would say things like, "Oh, you know, if you don't be quiet, then the black man next door is going to get you," and
What?
yeah, but I'm not even joking. She used to say stuff like
Oh.
that. And I used to ask her, you know, he's fine. Like, you can't just be saying that. And she was like, well, I have to shut them up somehow. And I was like, yeah, but you have to find a different way of doing it because that's setting a bad precedent. Um, but we're raised with that kind of racism, and I think that it's something that is just never talked about. It's never talked about, even within. And my major problem with it, and the reason that I am so angry about it, is that I feel as though people within my community, not just Muslims but ex-Muslims, people who've left that fold, still carry those prejudices. And I've seen a lot of, oh, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement has never done anything for the ex-Muslim movement, and that's why should we support them? And it's just a case of like, this is really selfish. If that is the reason for you not supporting this movement, that's extremely selfish because people, whether you like it or not, are dying. And we need to support those people who are, you know, screaming and shouting and having to talk about this.
So basically, your train of thought, if I were to say it right, is
Mm,
that because ex-Muslims feature like have like some sort of history of suffering, not just like in your country, but across the world,
mm.
then it would make sense for someone like you who suffered in your past and your history to also help others who are also suffering too.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't believe in, you know, selective activism. And at this point, I think I saw a tweet from Jenna Marbles yesterday, and she's someone who, again, very apolitical, but I love her. I aspire to be a version of her. Um, and she said something like, "This is no longer a political issue; it's a human rights issue." And I agree with that. And you know, for those of us who are sort of hailing ourselves and calling ourselves human rights activists, and then to not speak about this or to ignore this issue is, to me, extremely hypocritical. And that's more what my problem is. I don't necessarily know all of the facts and all of the details around this issue, but I do know that people should be talking about it.
Right. But I guess I'm gonna share my personal thoughts here because it seems as though I'm not gonna say like activism never ever works because obviously there's some examples of activism actually working. For example, from my country, we had, of course, the civil rights movement. We had people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X that fought against like the
Mm-hmm,
institutionalized racism. And
mm-hmm,
because of those kind of people like them and also Rosa Parks, we actually now have like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which basically states that you cannot discriminate based upon race or sexual orientation and the other kind of isms.
mm-hmm,
And so activism clearly has in fact worked, and I
mm-hmm.
don't think there's a bad thing. And of course, you mentioned earlier about like the feminism. Of course, like the earlier feminists did in fact also fought
Very
for the
peaceful.
very
The
peacefully.
early, they were called suffragettes,
Yes.
suffragists. They were very, very peaceful in their protests, and they placarded and they marched and stuff. But once the suffragette movement realized that that wasn't doing very much, that's when the movement became more radical. And that is the only route by which things change. If one thing is not working, you can't just keep doing that thing. You need to move it on to something different. And it moved into the territories of hunger strikes and you know more what would be called more radical, like they would be mailing themselves to parliament so that they would be heard, which now, if you think about it, is a little bit of a crazy idea, and that's actually why it's illegal in this country to mail yourself in the post, because some states do that. um, and it is kind of a crazy idea, but they used to do stuff like that. And I think that in this day and age where we've lived in relative peace in the West, I think that it's very, very easy to do this kind of like online sort of activism. And I guess you could blame me for that as well, because I do a lot of that. I do a lot of activism online, but at some point you either have to stand by your word or you have to abandon it. You can't just support one thing and then once another injustice is happening around the world, you don't have any kind of accountability for it.
Right. Now, earlier you mentioned something that was really interesting to me, and I would actually agree, is that over a period of time, like sometimes like activist groups, they tend to lose the focus on why they're actually fighting for what they are.
Yes.
Like, for example, I'm not sure how you feel about like the modern day feminists, but for me, when I see them complaining about the most trivial problems, I'm
Mhm.
talking about like,
Man spreading and
video.
all that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When I see stuff like that, I'm like, how come you're not fighting for other stuff that's actually relevant in my country? Let's take, for example, the issue of abortion, right?
Mhm.
In my country, of course, we have like the 1970s case for Roe versus Wade, and it actually legalized abortion across my nation.
Mhm.
However, starting last year, I believe one of the states was actually Alabama. They tried,
Alabama. Yeah.
yeah, basically want to make it illegal.
Yeah.
So, I'm kind of curious, like, if they're taking so much time, so
Mhm.
much effort talking about all this stupid crap about manspreading, why are they not fighting for, the abortion rights that we are facing right now?
So,
Yeah.
in terms of the feminist movement, I
Yeah.
don't label myself as a feminist
Yeah.
because of third wave feminism and Western feminism. I think that there is a place for feminism in this world, definitely, especially when we
Yeah.
consider all the injustices happening around the rest of the world, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in all parts, in other parts of the world. I think that again, it's got a lot to do with online activism, that people are kind of virtue signaling and they want to be seen as a good person, so they make these trivial things. It's the kind of the same argument I have with PETA and their kind of activism, because they don't seem to have this um, they seem to have this kind of blinders on, that they know who is an easy target and who they can go for. Because I saw a bunch of nonsense that Peter posted a couple of weeks ago about how they started a revolution on Animal Crossing. Like, do you not have do you not have better things to do? It's just I don't know. I think that I don't know why, to be honest. I don't know why people are focusing on these minor issues. If you're going to make it your life's purpose, or you are going to make it part of your life to fight for what's right, there are causes that you can fight for. I don't understand this need to like create causes. Like kind of make a mountain out of a molehill. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense because when you do stuff like you like with your Animal Crossing example, like
Mm.
people will look at you as crazy, and
Yeah.
so it will give you like a bad perception
But
of what you.
this is a massive charity. This is a massive charity that claims to support, and a couple of years ago they decided to label Steve Irwin as an animal abuser when that man had dedicated his entire life to the protection of animals.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not just that, but also stuff that's even darker for PETA too.
mm,
Because I researched a lot about them,
yeah.
and it turns out that most of these supposed animals that they do save, they end up euthanizing the animals. Like I think it's as high as like what was it, 90% of the animals that they get, they euthanize them. And so you care so much about the animals, but you do the sort of euthanizing of them. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's just so sad, really.
It really, really is.
But getting back to how I think activism can also lose the focus when it's first started. Now, for Black Lives Matter, I've been on YouTube for a really long time.
Mm,
Like a really, really long, like I probably longer than you actually. I've been on YouTube for like I want to say 5 plus years. Yeah, 5 plus years.
okay.
You started like last year, right?
I started in 2018. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when I started to make videos and started to cover stories, like sometimes I make so many videos that I look back on the videos and reflect about how I felt, and sometimes I don't agree with them, and sometimes I agree
Mm,
with them. And so when you make like a long catalog of videos, you get to remind yourself about different events and different stories,
mm,
and so Black Lives Matter, from what I remember, like when it was like 5 years ago.
mm,
It started like I believe 2013, 14, 15.
mm,
And it was like a response again towards like the police brutality. And of course people wanting to have justice. So I also kind of felt like you. I felt that of course, maybe I should, have some sort of solidarity. Maybe of course they have a great point about police brutality, which is like a lot of injustice going on.
mm,
But I feel as though when I saw them 5 years ago,
mm,
maybe it's completely different right now. Maybe it's completely different. Maybe it's something changed. But I felt that immediately when they started to do their activism, that they also felt like they were out of focus. That their goals that they wanted to do tend to be more extreme, more radical, per
mm,
se. Like, for example, I remember the story. It was like back in 2015. Now,
mm,
Black Lives Matter has like different types of like organizations in different parts of the world. Of course, it's my country. There's Canada, I
mm.
believe maybe United Kingdom right now, and these other kind of
We do, I think we
yeah,
do have some here.
yeah.
Mm,
So back in 2015, when Black Lives Matter Canada started to open up, there was like two major controversies that I could remember. So
mm,
the first controversy I remember, it was some sort of, gay pride parade.
mm,
Now, I don't have nothing against people who are gay, bisexual, whatever. I don't really care. I think as long as you're like a good person, a person who's nice, I don't have no problem with you.
mm.
So, when heard news about this gay pride parade getting interrupted by Black Lives Matter, I'm like, are you serious? Like, I thought, what's this have to do with the goal of police brutality? Want to fight
Yeah.
for police brutality?
Mm,
Why would you go to a gay pride parade? Would you go like you should probably go somewhere different than a gay pride parade?
yeah.
So another example that I felt that was like it loses its focus when it was like 5 years ago
Mm,
was like when they had like this protest in a library. Now I would say protest outside, protest on the streets
mm,
to get your message across.
mm.
But there was some sort of protest in the library, and they
Okay.
were screaming like, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a good idea to protest inside of a library because I don't think, again, like people are in a library to be quiet. Like one of the rules of the libraries is to read a book, use a
Mm,
computer, be quiet.
yeah.
So it seems kind
Yeah,
of
it
productive.
definitely seems
Yeah.
counterproductive. I think that sometimes what happens within
Yeah.
movements
Yeah.
is that people feed into hysterics because they're angry and there's a lot of emotions and it takes one person to start a fire. It takes one person to really rile up a crowd and say some shit and then suddenly everybody's losing their minds. Um, and I think that that's something that can be expected from any kind of big protest where a lot of people are angry. When you look at the Arab Spring, when you look at the riots that happened here in London in 2011, that's something that can be said about them is that it probably starts off well-meaning. It probably starts off with, this is what we're doing, this is why we're fighting, and often people need reminders for that. But can you really blame the hysterics on the whole movement?
I would probably blame the individual personally because when I
Hmm.
make videos, I try not to, say, well, this is X, Y, Z. Like, I would probably just, go after the individual because ultimately it's those particular individuals that are
Hmm.
also responsible. The only way I could possibly imagine blaming the entire organization if
Hmm.
it was like one of the founders or the main leaders
Yeah,
behind the
agreed.
organization.
Agreed. If it was one of the people who started the movement, who decided to do all these nonsense things, like for example, you have examples of very radical approaches to the civil rights movement with Malcolm X did some really really radical stuff. Black Panthers did a bunch of radical stuff. I think that that creates a bit more contention in what the movement means and where people stand on it. But when you look at especially with Malcolm X's involvement with the Nation of Islam and how he wanted to like create a different state for black people and all of that kind of
Oof.
stuff. Um, it's some really dark stuff. But when we're looking at the riots now and people looting and smashing up windows and stuff, can you really blame the entire movement for the people who are feeding into hysterics? And can you blame those people when the reaction of their government to their what started out as a peaceful protest is to send in riot police and use tear gas and rip away people's masks and use plastic bullets that are taking people's eyes out. I think that it's more complicated than, oh, we shouldn't support these thugs who are smashing up windows. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Right. Now, I remember like there was like a tweet you did like a long time ago. Like I remember you were responding to somebody who said the most ridiculous comment, which was that
I make a
people
lot. I do a lot of that, so you're gonna have to be more specific.
Okay. So the person I can't remember the exact
Hmm.
name, but they said somewhere along the lines that black people couldn't be racist. Like, do you remember that tweet?
Right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so like what do you think about those kind of
I
comments?
think that's dumb. I think that's stupid. Obviously, everyone. I think something that people aren't talking about when we talk about racism is that we all carry prejudices and we all, believe in stereotypes. And the fact that we aren't talking about them is adding to the problem. I think that there are people who are very, very reluctant to face their own prejudices that they hold and their own forms of racism. And the fact that we are not addressing it and we are not talking about it is making the problem worse. And it's obvious. It's obvious that people of color can be racist. The first segment of this talk was me talking about me as a person of color was brought up in racism. Black people are racist towards other black people. Like
Right, like for example, like I know that in my personal experience too,
yeah.
like there of course there's different shades of black people, right? There are like the more lighter ones, the more
Mhm.
complexions like me, and there are also
Yeah.
like the really dark ones. And so there would be like, racism among black people because of the different skin complexions.
Yeah. And there's a prejudice towards black people supporting other black stores and minority shops and things like that. I had a discussion about this a while ago. I'll have to find it. It's on a different channel. But it's obvious, and I do think that there is a certain level of racism towards white people as well, especially in this day and age where this whole white guilt thing is going around, and people want white people to pay for 500 years of slavery or something like that. I don't believe that the sons carry the sins of the fathers. I think that that is a time gone, and we need to move on into a better world. But at the same time, I think that racism still exists more so towards minorities because it's easy to scapegoat them.
Right, because one of the bigger discussions that we're having right now for this election season is reparations. And they try to use like stuff like slavery as evidence on why black people should get reparations.
Hmm.
Where my personal thoughts is I have not experienced any type of slavery. Like it would make more sense to give like the money towards like the slaves who actually experienced this, but No
Yes.
one from slavery is still alive to this day. Like there are still people that are alive for like, civil rights activism and we can still talk to them right now. But as far
Mm.
as slavery, no one's still alive. No one.
I think that at some point you have to accept your lot in life, and that's what I believe. I'm
Very.
very stoic in that way, and I think that's why like I don't really get involved in sort of identity politics because I don't like it. I'm very much a card. I'm going to play my hand. That's the kind of person I am. And I think to a point, you just have to accept your lot and move on with your life. Um, but I do understand. Well, I can't really understand that pain because it's not part of my history. But I do understand from the perspective of somebody who understands what slavery is like to an extent. Um, the anger that history can carry.
Right. So I think we covered pretty much everything for the last 30 minutes. So before we like sign out, you want to give like your social media accounts and everything else so that people can check you out?
Sure. So you can find me on YouTube. My YouTube is Faye the Most Gracious. It's on the screen. And you can also find me on Twitter, which is the platform that I probably use the most besides my YouTube channel. And you find me at Wroughton Fire. So if you want to follow me, come follow me.
Okay. And of course, you can follow me at Twitter. Let's see, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube
You still
at
using
Tyler.
Facebook?
Yeah, I have a Facebook page. It's not many people
Okay.
follow it though, but I have more followers on Twitter. But yeah, everywhere at Tyler Preston 20. And of course, I'll see you guys in the next video or live stream or whatever. Take care.